Hello, everybody. This is Betsy Wurzel, host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio. Jeanne White is the station manager and writes the blog, which I highly suggest you read because it's going to have a lot of information. Lillian Caldwell is the CEO. Here on Chatting with Betsy, I talk about many different topics, and I'm very honored to be talking to my special guest today about a topic that we don't hear much about, and it's the first time I will be discussing it on my show. Here on Chatting with Betsy, I talk about the taboo, or what people think is the taboo. And what we're going to talk about today is eating disorders. Do you know someone with the eating disorder? Do you have an eating disorder? If you want to learn about it, I suggest you listen to this podcast and share it, because when I talked to my guest the other day, I was taught something that was a myth. So I'm very grateful and honored to have with me today Dr. Cynthia Bulik, founding director of the University of North Carolina of Excellence for Eating Disorders at UNC at Chapel Hill. I want to welcome you, Dr. Bulik, and thank you for being on Chatting with Betsy today.
Betsy, thank you for the invitation and for talking about this topic.
You're welcome. Could you please tell the listening audience, because you have a very intense background, and tell about yourself, whatever you'd like to share.
Sure. So as you mentioned, I am the founding director of the University of North Carolina Center of Excellence for Eating Disorders, which is a premier institution for treatment, training, and research in eating disorders. And then I spend half of my time running the Center for Eating Disorders Innovation at Karolinska Institutet in Stockholm, Sweden.
Wow. That is impressive. And you are doing a research study. And you have done a research, and now you're doing a different research study. Is that correct?
Exactly. So right now we're in the middle of a study called EDGI, or the Eating Disorders Genetics Initiative, and people can read a lot about it at www.edgi.org. But that follows on the heels of a large study that we did called ANGI. Obviously, I like acronyms. And ANGI was the Anorexia Nervosa Genetics Initiative, where we really started delving into the fact that eating disorders have very clear genetic underpinnings.
That blew me away.
Yeah.
I learned so much from you the other day that I had to let you continue talking, because people need to understand. Well, I'll tell the people what my myth was. I was under the impression, because I heard this actually from probably on a talk show back in the 80s, that anorexia was a form of control that people have when their lives are out of control, and that's not it. So I want to thank you for correcting that myth.
No,
and
absolutely,
dispelling that.
Yeah, I mean, there have been so many myths surrounding eating disorders that we have all just sort of swallowed, because we've been told them in so many ways, often through the media. You know, there's been the control issue. There's been the, somehow parenting causes eating disorders. There's the somehow that eating disorders are just a choice, and that these are, young people who want to look like models. All of those things are completely untrue. And I'm going to just start with the fact that it is not just young people. Eating disorders don't discriminate on the basis of age, on the basis of gender, on the basis of race or ethnicity, on the basis of socioeconomic status. We see people across all of those spectrums who develop anorexia, bulimia, and binge eating disorder.
And do you find it more so now with the pandemic?
It's such a good question and such an important question, because, we know that even though COVID-19 is, a virus and a physical illness, and there's a physical pandemic going on, it is perfectly clear that there is a mental illness pandemic that's following on its heels. We know depression is increased. We know that suicide is increasing. And we did a survey of over 500 people in the United States and 500 people in the Netherlands and asked them, how is the pandemic affecting your eating disorder? And everyone, people with anorexia said they were restricting more. People with bulimia and binge eating disorder said that they were binge eating more. And they all said that their anxiety has just gone through the roof in comparison to what it was in 2019. And you rarely hear numbers like this, but 99% of the people said that they attribute that anxiety to the pandemic. So we know that it's exacerbating the illnesses. And we also heard from people who had recovered that the pandemic is making them feel like they're at higher risk for relapsing. So we need to be paying attention to mental health right now, probably more so than any of us had in our lives.
Absolutely. I am so happy in a way that I'm hearing more public service announcements on mental health well-being and to go for help, because I have discussed on this show many times, I'm an advocate for mental health issues. I suffer from depression myself. I'm a caregiver advocate. Many caregivers have depression. Yeah. I'm sure they probably have eating disorders. And we need to pop open the lid and get it out and shine a light on these disorders. And that's what I do on my show, and I'm so grateful for you to come on. Do you find, Dr. Bulik, that girls start younger than boys, or does it make a difference in their eating disorder?
Yeah. No, actually, no. In fact, one of the things that we found in a study that we did in Denmark was that boys are actually brought in for treatment at younger ages. And, that's very interesting to us, because when I started in this field, and Betsy, you and I are about the same age, when I started in this field, it was, pretty much people between the ages of 15 and, 25. And we've seen that really spread out on both ends. So we're seeing kids as young as 6, 7, 8 presenting for treatment for anorexia. And on the other end, we're seeing people in their 60s and 70s presenting with all three of these eating disorders. So, it's not the same clinical presentation that we saw years ago. And part of that is probably, hopefully, because we're just recognizing it more outside of those stereotypic age boundaries.
That's very interesting to know that boys, and I want the listening audience to really listen to this, boys are affected also by the media, of what you're supposed to look like, just like girls. And, I used to think, because I'm 62, I'm going to be 63, so I'm a baby boomer. I thought it was just girls. I mean, I knew, boys and men did have it, but I didn't know that they had it to such an extent than like girls do. I thought, it's basically a female problem. But boys do have it, because this quest for, the 6-pack abs, the 12-pack abs, to look like, Mr. Universe, and I say the fashion industry, Hollywood, this concept, a preconceived concept, you have to be a 00, and the pressure on girls, and I used to work in a preschool, is tremendous.
No, absolutely. And, one of the things that we've shown in our genetic research is, that certain people are at higher genetic risk for developing these illnesses. And, like the Angie study that we did actually isolated the first 8 regions on the genome that are associated with anorexia nervosa. And we took it one step further and actually looked at which genes were involved. And we found out that not only is there a psychiatric genetic component to anorexia, but there's also a metabolic component to anorexia nervosa. And that started making a lot of sense in my mind because, Betsy, we are all exposed to these cultural thinness ideals. And, probably 90% of us go on a diet at some point, but we don't all develop anorexia. And this helps us understand why some people are more vulnerable to those cultural messages than other people are, and it's rooted in their genes.
Wow. Now, do you see a difference, Dr. Bulik, among Caucasian women versus minorities in both sexes of being more
actually, we do not. And this is another myth that we have to absolutely positively bust, because the myth that more white people develop anorexia has kept many people from being properly diagnosed. And we need to make it perfectly clear to physicians, to psychologists, to school counselors and school nurses that eating disorders do not care what color you are. And if we're only thinking about white people, we're really doing a huge disservice to people from other racial backgrounds and ethnic backgrounds by not detecting these illnesses early on. So, like I said, eating disorders do not discriminate, especially when we look at eating disorders. Some of the studies have actually shown higher rates in the Hispanic population. So, we need to open up our eyes and take off the blinders and be looking everywhere for these illnesses.
Yes, I agree. 1,000%. Definitely. I asked that because, I had already interviewed somebody, but I'm going to interview her again next week about drug research, medications. Right. And to, research with various minorities to find out how a drug affects them differently than a Caucasian person. And I know that there are disparities with minorities among, research and looking for different, illnesses. And yes, I will bring it up on my show that there are disparities with minorities. That's a fact. And, we need to be aware that all people can develop anorexia or other eating disorders. How does someone get involved with your research if they want to be part of your study?
Sure. So we are inviting people who have had anorexia, bulimia, or binge eating disorder at any point in their life to participate. Because the bottom line is your genes don't change. So whether you had an eating disorder 30 years ago or if you have one today, we're still very interested in you participating. So all you have to do is go up to the website, which is www.edgi.org, and you'll see a button that says Take Our Survey, and that's the first step. We get your consent, you answer a bunch of questions about your eating history, but then we also ask you other questions because we want to get a sense of the full picture of the person, because we know that people with eating disorders often have depression, often have anxiety, often have life events that might have been traumatic in their background. So we ask questions about all of those things. And then we just send you this little kit in the mail, and it's so simple. We call it a spit kit. It's a little tube that you basically put saliva into, cap it back up, you pop it back into the mail in the postage-paid envelope, and we're able to extract your DNA from that saliva. And then the way this works is we compare the DNA of thousands of people with eating disorders to the DNA of thousands of people without eating disorders. And we can, by comparing those two sets of genomes, we can start to identify where the differences are. And that is what tells us this is where you need to look for the genes, and there will be hundreds of them, that influence risk for eating disorders. So that's how easy it is. Online questionnaires and a little tube of saliva.
Wow, that reminds me of my ancestry DNA test with saliva. Now, Is this international? Dr. Bulik, can somebody from overseas? Oh, they can.
Well, it all depends on where you are. So right now we're active in Australia, New Zealand, the United States. Sweden is coming on board. We're hoping Mexico's going to come on board. And speaking of health disparities, within a month, we're going to have all of this available in Spanish as well. So if you're more comfortable doing your questionnaires in Spanish, we will have that available to you. It's the same website that will have a big button that says en español. So you can just go ahead and do it all in Spanish, because we really want to make sure we're getting representation.
That is awesome. I got goosebumps. I'm here in New Jersey. I got goosebumps because I get so excited. I get so passionate because the show and Passionate World Talk Radio is international. So I always ask guests that, can people from overseas participate? So that's great that they can in those areas. And this will be, in the blog. So if I just have to put this out there. If you missed any of this podcast, listen to it again on Apple, Google, wherever you hear podcasts. You'll be here chatting with Betsy. Excuse me. Dr. Bulik, this might sound naive, but I don't know much about the treatment for anorexia or binge eating. Is there medications available now to help somebody?
So we have one FDA-approved medication for bulimia nervosa and one FDA-approved medication for binge eating disorder, but we have absolutely no FDA-approved medications or any medications that actually work in the treatment of anorexia nervosa. And that is incredibly disheartening, because your listeners might not realize that anorexia has the highest mortality rate of any psychiatric disorder, with the exception right now of opiate dependence, because we're in the middle of another pandemic when it comes to that. And part of the problem here is that we haven't understood the biology of these illnesses. And that's why this research is so important, because if we can understand the biology, and that's where this genetic research is leading us, we'll be able to repurpose or develop new medications that actually target the biology. Because right now, for anorexia, we know that food is medicine, but we also know that only 30% of people with the illness actually recover. So we're not doing a good enough job at all. And, that's why, you talk about your passion, Betsy. That's why I'm so passionate about doing this research, because, in my lifetime, I want to stop deaths from anorexia nervosa. Every time I hear about another person who has died from this illness, it just chips a little piece of my heart away. And, for all of the parents and caretakers and loved ones who have lost someone to these illnesses, I want them to know that we're doing everything in our power to turn things around so that other people don't have to suffer in the same way.
Oh, I understand your passion, Dr. Bulik, and I love it. I love people who are passionate and care about what they are doing, because it's so important. And, it takes someone with a passion to make some waves and to start, an investigation, to start the research. How is your research funded?
The original study, so the Angie study, was funded by the Klarman Family Foundation. So it was a philanthropic organization, and they funded that study, which really gave us the results that we needed to go to the National Institute of Mental Health, and that's the organization that is now funding EDGI. So we're really grateful to the Klarman Family Foundation for their original contribution, and now we're super happy that the feds have agreed to support this research. And of course, other countries, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get the Netherlands and Mexico and Germany to all have their federal bodies or sort of independent philanthropic organizations to fund EDGI in their country, so that we can make this truly global.
That's wonderful. It's a topic. It's a illness that needs to be addressed. The myths, I know that, I was taught and to be told now that it's genetic, it just puts another face on it, another twist to it, because I thought it was all about control myself. Like I said before, my husband's niece, she died at 38 as a result of anorexia. And, it's really sad because she had a young daughter. And just to see her go down to, bones. I know that Dr. Bulik, that, we're around the same age. Karen Carpenter.
Yep.
Died from anorexia. Beautiful woman. And, from what the biography that I watched on TV, the record producers told her she was overweight. Oh. And so she would, starve herself. And I think, you could tell me if I'm wrong, I won't be insulted, but I think the pressure for women, entertainers, women in the Hollywood have more pressure to stay a certain size than men do. What is your opinion?
Well, I think you're right, but I still think that there is that pressure there for guys, too, to look like these, like you mentioned before, the 6-packs and the 12-packs and, getting their body fat down. And, actually with this, and this is another podcast topic, with this whole intermittent fasting trend that's been going on with men, we've been seeing guys showing up with real disordered eating and obsession about their weight and shape. But going back to Karen Carpenter, I swear every time I hear her sing on the radio, if I'm listening to an oldie station or something, I just start crying, because I think she had the most amazing voice on the planet.
Yes.
And when I think about losing her and how much more she would have been able to contribute to the artistic world, it just breaks my heart. But, she brought awareness to this illness. She started helping us get it out of the shadows, but it's taken how long for us now to get to the point where we are now, where we're looking at what really causes this illness. But you're 100% right. Whenever someone's put in a situation where they're weight shamed or told they're too fat, or said that, athletes, entertainers, all of these people who get body shamed or told they need to lose weight, that lights the fire. That is just putting, putting gasoline on a fire that's going to take off. And, we have to broaden our acceptance of different body sizes and shapes and colors, because, what's viewed as beautiful, it's just way too narrow. And none of us look like these cultural ideals. Let's face it. You and I talked about this the other day, especially as we age. And, I told you about billboards in retirement villages that basically send the message it's not okay to get wrinkles anymore. You need to get Botox and liposuction and everything to make yourself not look like you're 80. Well, guess what? When you're 80, you're going to look like you're 80.
That's right, and there's nothing wrong with that. I have heard from, watching the different entertainers, and especially the women, the men weren't told this, or at least they didn't say it in their interview, but the females were like, the record companies, get a weight trainer, go on a diet.
Yeah.
And it's, different for women, and then you see them go down to, nothing. And it's sad. I say, like I said, I'm a baby boomer, so when Twiggy came on the scene, everybody wanted to be like Twiggy.
Right.
No one appreciated the full-figured woman of, like, my mom's time, Lana Turner, Jane Russell, all those women who had shapes, and it was okay to have a shape.
Right.
Dr. Bulik, what should parents look for, whether it's a boy or a girl, in eating disorders? When should they be concerned? Because, kids could be very picky. There are children who are very picky. And what should they do?
Right. So, there are a couple different things that can show up. And, again, this is at any age. So if people start not wanting to eat with you. So if they're always saying, oh, I ate before, or I ate at so-and-so's house, or I'll eat later, if you hear a lot of questions about reassurance for shape and weight, do I look okay in this? Does this make me look fat? I hate my body. Any negative body talk like that. On the other side, if you have a daughter and she stops menstruating, or if you have a grown woman who stops menstruating, or if you start seeing food disappear. So, we hear lots of stories about young kids who start binge eating at a very young age. And if they're finding comfort in food and all of a sudden you're finding, all the cookies gone or all the ice cream gone. These are signs that, there might be something going on in terms of unhealthy eating. And the most important thing to do is get an assessment. I think people are afraid to make that first step about taking someone in for an evaluation, but it's the most important step. And, the person might say, this is normative, it's okay, keep your eye on it. But they also might say, thank you so much for bringing her or him in now. This could be the first stages of an eating disorder. Let's get in there and do some therapeutic work and make sure we have, the right situations in the family in place so that this doesn't snowball and go downhill and become a threshold eating disorder. So that's really the first step. Don't be ashamed. Don't worry about stigma. Get an evaluation and see where things stand.
Very good advice. I think parents sometimes go from one extreme to the next, overfeeding children, but then some parents will tell their children, oh, you're fat. And that's how it starts. Or why don't you lose weight? Or you would look better this way. Parents, if you're listening to this podcast, please don't do that to your children. I mean, if someone did it to you,
Betsy. Yep.
But please don't do that to your children.
I think that's the most important thing you said today, because I always say that, little kids can be like Velcro, and when you say things like that to them, it just sticks. It sticks to anyone. Being body shamed sticks to you. And we don't want to tell our kids that they're fat. We don't want to tell them to lose weight. We want to set a good example. We want to really convey healthy eating and physical activity habits. But body shaming can do permanent harm. And it can trigger an eating disorder. So we really don't want to go down the body shaming path with anyone.
That's right. Absolutely right. Such an honor to have you on, Dr. Bulik. How can people get in touch with you? It will be in the blog, but
if they go up to that EDGY website, the www.edgy.org, there is an email associated with that. And so they'll be able to grab the email off of that website and find me that way.
Excellent. What advice would you give young men and women about their body?
I think one of the things that – oh, sorry. Go ahead, Betsy.
So that they don't have that body shaming. And I know it's vicious out there in the world, especially among teenagers and even preteen. What advice would you give parents to encourage your children to be who they are, but be healthy?
Yeah. One of the things that I wrote about in one of my books, the one called The Woman in the Mirror, although this is true for both men and women, is the importance of helping yourself and your children to separate out their body esteem from their self-esteem. And we want to make sure that we can really build people's self-esteem totally independent of what their appearance is. And, so often the first thing we say about someone's child or someone's partner is, oh, she's so pretty, or oh, he's so handsome. And we need to stop doing that, frankly. We really need to focus on all those other things that make you a wonderful person that have absolutely nothing to do with how you look. And the separation of body esteem from self-esteem is such an important point in becoming a strong, self-confident, non-appearance-focused individual. So I think that would probably be my main message of how we can get our kids to feel good about themselves without having it rest on their physical appearance.
Thank you. That is excellent advice, and I highly encourage the audience, go on Dr. Bulik's website. If you have an eating disorder, go into the research. Be part of it. We need to learn from people, and we need a cure for this. And I just want to tell people, you know, it's very hard when you are body shamed, especially by your parents, because I know I was, to get that out of your head. You are beautiful as you are. It's the soul, it's the inside that counts, that radiates out, not the outside appearance, which we always judge first, and we shouldn't. And I just loved having you on, Dr. Bulik. Thank you so much. It was an honor and a privilege to talk to you. And I would love to have you on again because we could discuss many topics about mental health.
I would love
whenever
to,
you have the
Betsy.
time.
You know where to find
because
it.
Yes, because it's important. And this is October, although October is now more than half over, is Mental Health Awareness Month, folks.
Right.
And people are struggling. They're struggling with their body image. They're struggling with anxiety. That's at all-time high. Caregivers, and my heart is for, you know, everyone, but especially caregivers, the mortality rate is high. Suicide rate is high, Dr. Bulik.
Yep.
Mental health disorders is high with caregivers, and it could lead to an eating disorder. Who knows? I mean, it could. Be part of this research. I can't impress that enough. And people, be kind. Just everyone has a battle. Everyone's struggling these days. Just be kind. You know, it's easier to be kind than to be mean. You don't know the person next to you, what they're going through. So don't be in a rush. Slow down. And just, I used to tell the kids, chillax. You know, chill out and relax. Chillax. And I just, you know, thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Dr. Bulik, for coming on. It was a pleasure. Folks, you can find me on Amazon Music, wherever podcasts are heard, Apple, Google. I'm on YouTube, CastBox. And I want to thank Lillian Caldwell, CEO, because Lillian sent me the press release about Dr. Bulik and her research. And I'm very honored that I received a reply. So it was, I want to thank Lillian because I want to bring awareness. This is what Chatting with Betsy is about. It is about bringing awareness to different topics. And this is a very important topic, eating disorders. Let's just accept people how they are. It's so important. I don't care if I sound like a broken record. It's important. Let's start accepting people for how they are. Because you know what, folks? When we cut ourselves open, what do we bleed? Red blood. Okay? We're all the same. We might be different on the outside. We're the same inside. So just be compassionate. And until we chat again, this is Betsy Wurzel, host of Chatting with Betsy and Passionate World Talk Radio. Bye-bye, everybody.